Hey guys, thank you so much for joining another episode of Price on Purpose. I am your host, Stacy Price, and I have the awesome Marty Wallner here with us. Marty, I hope I pronounced your name right. Did I say it right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Great to connect with you, Stacy.
Likewise. I'm really interested to learn how you came up with this healthy anger toolbox and what exactly does that mean. So, if you can, what is the healthy anger toolbox?
Well, anger is a natural emotion that everyone
Hmm.
experiences in all sorts of different situations and different relationships. But many times when people think about anger expression, they think about it negatively. That anger
Right,
expression and anger comes out in different ways that perhaps make people feel later on they feel bad about how they express their anger. So there could be
right.
regret or guilt or some sadness. Also, it's disconnecting with relationships. And so when people think about anger and the connotations and their understanding of anger, even though it's an inevitable emotion that everybody experiences, it seems many times to be considered always negative. And certainly there are a lot
Right,
of negative ways to express anger, but the
right.
healthy anger toolbox is about changing the understanding of anger, what's happening for an individual in their mind and body when they get angry, and
Mm,
being able to use that as an energy to be able to express it in healthier ways so that after an angry exchange, that person can actually feel better and can actually maybe have deeper connections with the person that they've been having the
mm,
exchange with. So healthy anger is anger that allows a person to release energy and get that emotion out, but in
mm.
healthy ways that can help us feel better and more connected to the people that we're dealing with.
Right. Yeah, it's so funny. In my past life, I was just like, I in my when I say past life, I should say it a little differently. In the past, I'll just say in the past. Uh, Anger for me was something that I didn't think served me in a sense. I didn't think it was necessary to express it. And present day, I've realized I think anger is an insight to self, a little bit of what we're going through and what is triggering us or causing frustration. So what have you learned through this journey, and is this creation of the healthy anger toolbox fueled by a personal journey of yours?
Well, in a larger conversation of stress, I have been challenged and have dealt with a lot of stress and how it has impacted my mind and body. And a lot of times my stress would come out and manifest itself in anger,
Mm,
different types of anger, not necessarily always an outward type of anger. A lot of times it's self-criticism and a lot of
mm,
negative thinking. And there's a lot of impact when we break down how each individual is impacted by that emotional rush, by that emotional dysregulation, the emotional hijacking at times.
yeah.
And I had always struggled with that.
Mm,
And the stress and how it impacted my mind and body as I was growing up. I mean, as a teenager, I had an ulcer, a stomach ulcer from the
wow.
stress because I didn't know how to express myself and get my emotions out.
Mm,
I was, certainly teenage at those years, you deal with a lot of different stuff, body, mind, and body changes, plus a lot going on around you. But the idea was I wasn't empowered or equipped with tools to know
right.
how to attune to my mind and body. And when I would get into those angry situations or stressful situations, and I would feel that emotion building up, and I wouldn't be able to know how to release it in healthy ways, and didn't have that knowledge, that awareness, and the tools to be able to have some emotional regulation and get through situations.
Mm,
It again started with a stomach ulcer, but then
that's
worked me
so
into
interesting. Yeah.
anxiety and some mental health impact. And so I dealt with it as a young person, a lot of different stress issues and how that manifested itself and some anger issues. And so,
Mm,
really learning, there's a lot of research, a lot of mind, body, brain based research as to what's happening in our brains and our
right.
bodies when we get emotionally escalated. And the more I was able to connect with that, I was then able to empower myself with tools. And once I got to a different place and was able to change my anger into healthier expression and where I was able to actually become angry and be angry, but not feel bad about it and
Mm-hmm.
actually feel more connected, then I was then moved to helping others. Now, this is also,
Yeah.
Stacy, in a larger context for me. I'm also a trauma educator and healer. So for
Mm.
17 years, I've been dealing with trauma impacted communities, inner city communities,
Mm.
trauma at different levels, and a lot of trauma impact the expression of that can be aggression and anger as well. And so I've
Right.
dealt with that and have been actually connecting with different communities in the trauma conversation about how to be able to get that energy out in healthier ways.
Yes. Wow. Yeah, that is huge. You're speaking about a certain part that I've realized that, not only in my own family, but with others, that when emotions, especially with anger, frustration, sadness, trauma, when those things are not addressed, they can potentially manifest or transition into a physical issue. Like, so when you focus on dealing with trauma and stuff like that, like, I guess, can you give me an example of something that can help someone to deal with a space if they're in that space at the moment?
Well, first of all, awareness, self awareness is the first key. So I
Mm,
deal a lot of it with childhood trauma and something called the
mm,
Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACEs study. And so there's actual measurements in terms of childhood trauma, and it actually impacts the wiring of the brain, the developing brain for children, and also as they grow into young adults and then adulthood. And so
mm.
just knowing again, understanding how the brain is impacted, the architecture and chemistry of the brain then enables us to empower people with tools to be able to understand what triggers them, what gets them into that emotional again escalation or the emotional dysregulation. And sometimes it's a hijacking where people say and do things that later on they don't even remember
Yeah.
or figure out why did I say or do that. And so just that awareness, the first step is helping people be aware as to what's happening. And a lot of times, Stacy, it starts with body sensation changes. So the earlier we
Mhm.
can detect it and we can catch it, our heart starts to beat faster. Maybe we have some perspiration on our palms or we have muscle tension, but something's happening in our bodies and we can feel that anger. And for people that have been impacted by trauma, one of the first ways that we can connect with healing is about those body sensations and to help them
Mm.
understand that when they get into situations and they feel triggered and they start to feel that emotional impact in their mind and body, empower them with tools and what they can do for themselves and advocate for themselves in that moment.
Oh man, that's so huge, Marty, because it's so interesting that we're ourselves, and we sometimes, some of us, we don't even look at who we are. Like, we don't look at it. We're operating so outwardly. Like, okay, I got to do this, and I'm going to the next thing, and I'm doing this, and then it's like, oh, my back hurts, but I'm gonna do this, and like, why does my neck hurt? Okay, I'm gonna keep going and keep going. I've been getting this pain a little bit. Keep going, and then we don't actually question, like, what why am I feeling physical physical pain? A lot of people, you know, hold pain in their back, their neck. I know, even me, my shoulders. Sometimes you don't even realize, like, literally, we don't even realize, like, how tense we are. And then when somebody says relax, we're like, what does that mean? So, like, in this space, like, what are we starting to see with dealing with anger and the whys? Like, how do we relax?
Well, you just actually focused on the exact intention as to how we switch from into healthy anger and to realize that emotional trauma, emotional dysregulation like anger, all sorts of anxiety, depression, sadness, it gets stored in our bodies. And
Yeah.
so it lives in our central nervous system. It lives in our muscles. We talk. There's the Body Remembers is a book that we use in our trauma education in terms of how the body stores all of our experiences, especially emotional experiences. And so
Mhm.
we have to find ways to get that trapped emotion and that trapped energy out. And so that's actually in the trauma conversation, Stacy, that's how we resolve trauma. We move it from unresolved to resolved, is to be able to find ways to get that energy out that may be stuffed or stored in the body. Now,
Mm,
when we talk about different ways, there's a lot of different ways. It's very individualized. Each
right,
person's different. So we start with things like mindfulness and yoga and meditation, and there's all
right,
sorts of tools. Now, everyone doesn't connect with all these tools, and so
right, right.
it's really something. Again, we start with awareness. We
Mm,
have the individuals help to understand what's happening in the mind and body, and then we introduce different strategies and tools to see what
right.
that person can connect to. For some, it's breathing, it's nature walks, it's exercise. A lot of people need to go out for a run or do something
Yeah,
to exercise. And so
right.
there's a long list of ways, but it's all about the person being intentional, not allowing, like you're saying, when your back hurts and your neck hurts, or you're feeling anxious in the morning, or something else is going on, and you're feeling that stress, mind and body, you need to do something. People need to find some way to pause, even for 5 minutes, to take a
Yeah.
walk, to go sit in a dark room, listen to music, go drink a glass of cold water. There's all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
sensory things in that moment, but really not just saying, "Oh my gosh, I have a pain in my back or my neck, and I'm going to try to, muscle through or soldier through that." To really be
Mm,
attuned to the mind and body and realize that if I'm feeling something, something's going on. And if it's stress,
mm.
if I can connect it to stress, then what can I do for myself to be able to get some of that energy out?
Right. It's so funny. I'm going to be speaking about the I came up with this speaking engagement called Permission to Unlock. Um, because I feel that sometimes, with the day-to-day activities, whether we're parents or not, or whatever it is that our daily responsibilities call for, we get lost in it. And we don't actually create the moment to pause, because sometimes, we can recommend to somebody, oh, join me for a yoga class, let's do yoga, or let's do this, or oh, I love it, but I can't, I don't have enough time, I don't have time. Tell us how important it is to, I guess, create time to address anger or any emotion. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's one of our primary healthy anger tools, Stacy, is self
Mm-hmm.
care. Self
Mm,
care and understanding. Sometimes when people think of self care, they think of kind of larger strategies like going on vacation or joining a gym or
right.
doing, and so that's
Something
great too.
drastic.
But there are actually small ways during the day in
Right.
5 minute increments, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And it's not necessarily because we actually have a whole plan for those who don't have time for self care. When am I going to fit that
Mm,
in? When am I going to meditate? When am I going to take a yoga class? When am I going to? Well, we actually have tools where it can be it can be breathing for 60 seconds or 2 minutes. It can be 5 minutes of an activity. We have different small tools of self care. And so the idea
right.
is for the busy person who is heading in all different directions, including parents. I've helped hundreds of parents with anger and changing
Mm,
stress in terms of finding those moments for a parent in a very busy day with
mhm.
lots of children around. And I deal with a lot of trauma impacted communities, and to be able to find some way to refill the tanks, to
Yeah.
find some way to recharge, even just refresh the mind just for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, just time alone, or just to walk away, and just small ways of showing self-care. Because
Yeah.
again, if we can let it out in small ways during the day, it doesn't build up as much at the end of the day or over the course of time.
Oh, heck yeah. Because it's so important. I don't even think sometimes we even realize that we make so much time for work, or so much time for taking care of somebody else, or so much time, like we're just dedicating time to that. And we think we're fine. Like we literally think we're fine, but we don't even realize that we're like a step away from like I don't even know what the word is, just losing it. We don't even realize it.
Chaos sometimes for
Yeah.
some people. Things can really go quickly and change. They're
Mhm.
just doing the best they can to keep all the balls in the air, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then something happens stressful. And
Mhm.
certainly what we've all been dealing with the last 18 months or so with COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns, that's a whole nother layer of stress.
Mhm.
And it's caused people to become very emotional, and a lot anger has resulted because of that for one reason or another. So there's a lot of stressors, a lot of trauma going on. And so it's all about each individual empowering themselves with tools and understanding that life is going to be stressful. And again, anger is an inevitable emotion. So we're going to feel angry at times. Now, something else that is great in the awareness piece, Stacy, is that anger is most times a secondary emotion. So a lot of times it can be very valuable to kind of unpeel the anger and find out what's really going on underneath that. Is it frustration? Is it disappointment? It could be shame. It could be anxiety. It could be fear. There's a lot of other things that could be underneath that that's put into this large group called anger. And again, we understand that behavioral expression of that, but a lot of times the self-awareness comes to really figure out, what else am I feeling? I'm feeling angry, but what else is going on? And that can be very effective to trying to address that need. Now, behavior is need driven. And so when people become angry, there's a need there. And it could be an emotional health need or a relational health need. And it's all about finding out what that need is. And so when I connect with people and try to help them change their stress and change their anger, we go deeper. We start with the behaviors, but then we go deeper and we try to figure out the other emotions and what's going on underneath and what do they actually need that may be causing those emotions and causing the anger.
Oh, heck yeah, Marty. Like, it's so funny that you said that. I was just doing a previous podcast on another show I have called Quality Theory. And I speak a lot about the customer experience and what it's like being an agent on the phone and that type of idea. So I was on the phone one day and this gentleman called in and he was really, really upset. Like, I mean, he was angry. And I'm grateful that I was the one that answered the phone that day. And it's so interesting because his first emotion was anger and frustration. And when I look at the account, I'm seeing that this guy, they called the cops on him. He was getting really angry and it's just a shame. And when I really listened to what he was going through, he didn't feel acknowledged by his family. Because he kept on saying, I'm doing this and I'm doing this. I'm like, oh, you don't feel appreciated. You don't feel seen. You don't feel heard. And if I didn't take the time to really get down into that with him, this could have been a really bad situation because just like you said, with unaddressed anger, we can do things that we don't even remember, like just straight up black out. And it's so wild because this is kind of like Maya Angelou's quote that I always keep with me. She says, we're more alike than we're unalike, and it's so profound to see that although this person may be expressing anger in this way, it's usually that's like the cover or protection in a sense. I call that that's like the exoskeleton. But then there's something else that's in the soft parts. You know what I mean? And we don't always want to show it because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if this person's going to treat it right, or we've shared it with somebody else and we don't know if they're going to do the same thing. They stabbed at it. We don't know what they're going to do. You know what I mean? So it's just so interesting that you said that. It's very profound and very, very true that with anger, there's so many sub emotions, I guess we could say.
And what I'm hearing that you also gave him a safe space to be able to get to that point of discovery. Right. A lot of times people in trying to connect with other angry people, they get caught on that behavior because of the outward behaviors are so tough to deal with. Right. The fact that you were willing to hear him and allow him to have a voice and express what was going on for him. And that safety, and that's what we try to build up in terms of connecting with people and try to give them a safe place to be able to share their story. And many times just listening and healthy listening is the first step of what people need because they don't have that. They have a lot of judgment, they have a lot of suggestion, but not have someone that actually accept and understand and respect and meet them where they are. And so that's really in terms of trying to help and connect with people, because a lot of times, quite frankly, when we try to connect with someone who is struggling with anger, they're not looking to connect with it. It makes them almost
No.
angry to have somebody come in and say, I want to help you with anger. That can make people
Yeah.
angry. Even
Right.
talking about anger or looking inside at have an individual look inside themselves and try to address why they're angry can make them angry. And
Yeah.
so we start with safety, and we start with respect and understanding and acceptance. And I meet people where they are, Stacy, depending upon their story. And again, I deal with a lot of different people who have been impacted by trauma. And so,
Right.
I need to meet them, and children as well. I deal with as young
That
as
must be
3 and
tough.
4-year-olds in the preschool
Yeah.
age. And so, a lot of that's sensory, a lot of that's playing Play-Doh and sand and toys. And so there's all sorts of different ways of setting up that safety. But what you did and what you shared with that gentleman was giving him some safety to be able to tell his story and have that voice and just hold that power and control for that moment. And that's
Right.
what we call meeting people where they are, and kind of
Exactly.
putting everything else aside just for that moment and allow them to share what's going on for them.
Heck yeah, like, I think that's the thing. We don't even realize how important our role is in a space where somebody may be, sharing their anger with us or their frustrations. We don't realize like how important our participation as far as in a light way in creating that safe space and to question and to understand, most importantly, what they're going through. So I guess I would ask, for this space, like, let's say we're on the receiving end of anger. What are some tips, or are there tips of things that we can practice to, if it is safe, even for us in the moment, because that too, sometimes the person can be like, I'm like, what can we do to show up to create that safe space?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge it can be very challenging when someone's getting
Yeah,
angry at you and they're right in your face with those angry behaviors. You and I are talking about angry behaviors, but boy, in the heat of the angry moment,
it's
and
tough.
someone's right in your face, and the language being used and the nonverbals and the aggression, or maybe it's something where someone has disengaged and pulled away, and now you can't actually talk to them. They've kind of closed down and shut down at some level. And so those
Mhm.
behaviors can be very, very challenging. So the
Mhm.
first thing to do is, again, we talk about the sensory aspects of it. So
Mm.
when an individual is getting angry, they go into a lower brain state, into the sensory part of their brain, which is actually also the survival part, the fight or flight part of the brain as well. But
Mm.
sensory things are what calms that part of the brain. And so, especially with children, but certainly adults as well, if they get into that rage and they're getting angry and putting out a lot of energy,
Mm.
we start to feel a certain something. We even, it can really push our buttons, get under our skin, especially with kids. But to be able to maintain some level of empowerment as to how to stay calm, because
Mm.
an important principle, Stacy, is it's impossible for an upset adult to calm down an upset child. And so
Mhm.
any angry situation, even adult to adult, if one person is so upset and projecting all of this energy, and that's making me upset, excuse me, the chances are we're going to escalate that, and the two emotions are going to
Right.
just feed into each other. So the
Right.
first thing that we suggest to empower people is to come up with strategies to be able to stay somewhat calmer. So if
Right.
someone's becoming angry at you and you're starting to feel a certain something and you feel that emotion build up, now it maybe walk away. I mean, if
Right.
someone's right in your face and it's like too much energy, we may need to you may need to say, if it's an adult, I'm going to need a couple of moments right now. You're giving me a lot right here, and I'm going to need a couple moments. Boundaries, personal space boundaries,
That's a big one.
breathing. We talk
Yeah.
about, I use a tool, Stacy, called BMR. So
Mm.
that's breathe, mantra, refocus. And so
Mm.
intentional breathing, belly breathing, just one or two can very quickly activate the part of the central nervous system that calms down. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. And
Mm.
so two deep belly breaths. Do
Mm.
that twice in the heat of an angry moment, and the brain and body will calm down.
Yeah.
While doing that, you can have mantras. The second part is the positive self-talk. Now, with children, it can be things like, he's only 8 years old, or she's only trying to push my buttons, or we only have 20 more minutes until the end of this activity. There are different short phrases, that positive
Mm,
self talk, that we can quickly use to help us get into a somewhat calmer, may not get us completely
right.
calmed down, but a somewhat calmer. So now I'm breathing, I have
Mm,
mantras, positive self talk, and now develop strategies to refocus, to figure out what do I need, or what does this other person, this child, need at this moment. And so
mm,
that's the process. We actually call that the 60-second calm down, the 1 minute calm down. You can do that in 60 seconds.
mm,
Breathe, mantra, and refocus. And so that would be a
mm.
simple kind of in the moment tool to try to stay in a somewhat regulated space while someone else would be getting angry at.
Mm, yeah, it sounds like what I'm hearing. These are great. First of all, they're great tools. I like the acronym, and it sounds like it's a reminder of the present moment. Like it's trying to get you into a space to be like, because I think what can potentially happen in moments where we're confronted with anger or an uncomfortable situation. Um, we go into a space to almost try and predict what's going to happen and to prepare ourselves for a threat, and the reality is that may not actually be the case, and it takes us away from being in the present moment because it's like, I got to get out of here. You know what I mean? So it's so interesting now that I'm thinking about, what anger means and what it could feel like to be confronted with that type of energy. It's like, well, what do I do? Like, what do I do? It's like, oh, gotta go. You know what I mean? Or you know what? Okay, are they saying what I think they're saying, or what am I in the moment? So those are some great tools to kind of use and be like, okay, I am safe, or is this a lot? I think that's the boundary thing, to be like, okay, we have to serve ourselves to be like, okay, is this a space where we can feel safe to discuss or to resolve? If do we need a minute? Like, what does Stacy need, or what does that person need in that moment? And I think that's where we have to champion our values and boundaries, most importantly, to know, like, all right, I need to walk away, or yeah, I could do this. You know what I mean?
And that also, in addition, yes, I concur. In addition to what you're saying, it's that self-talk.
Mm,
It's what's going on, the talk inside of our heads. And I know you've had a previous conversation about the negative thinking, and when we're
mm,
angry, what's happening is, if we actually had a brain scan on an angry person when they're getting angry, we would see changes in the thinking patterns and the connections,
yeah.
and it causes distorted thinking. And so
Mm,
we tend to start doing all sorts of thinking patterns, angry thinking patterns, and just to realize that we can change that, rather than
right.
the anger controlling our thinking. We can control the angry thinking. We can start to have positive self-talk. We can bring ourselves down for that emotion. We talk about an anger thermometer, Stacy. We talk about
Mm,
situations that if you're hitting an 8, what can you do? How can you bring it down to a 7? How can you bring it down to a 6? And a lot of
mm,
times it is in that moment. You mentioned about the in the moment, and back to parenting, we deal a lot with like temper tantrums, where a child will melt down in 30 seconds, and the parent, the adult, feels a certain something, but they know that to be the most effective parent in that moment, they need to stay calm, or they want to stay calm in that
right.
moment. But
Right.
here's the child melting down for whatever reason, in whatever situation, and very quickly the emotion can escalate between that adult and that child. If the adult yells at
Right.
the child or reacts in an angry way, the child's going to become even more angry, and then the
Right.
adult's going to become more. So it's really in that moment, like you were saying, it's really trying to figure out. Now, in that situation, maybe the parent doesn't have the opportunity to walk away. Maybe that's not a strategy. But a
Hmm.
lot of times, it's what's going on inside the thought process in any angry
Right.
situation, and what's that story that we're telling ourselves, and how can we do something to somewhat change that story?
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting you came up with that scenario, because I can only imagine what some parents are going through, Nope, this present is for Johnny. We're going to the store for Johnny, but I want something too. It's like, we're not here to get something for you. And they just start freaking out. That could be really tough. And I think a lot of parents operate out of, I'm embarrassed because it's my child and they're a reflection of me. And now everybody thinks I'm not a good parent. And now here's proof. And everybody knows. It's so interesting what a parent can go through in that thought process that you're talking about. It's so
Yes.
interesting now. So
and they do feel judged again around peers.
Yeah.
They feel judged, and that can actually feed into the emotion. So I do a lot of parent anger coaching just for what you're saying. We do role playing, Stacey. We actually role play when we get, because there I won't say 10, there's probably more, but there's some classic parenting situations that parents want to kind of role play through.
Yeah.
And that's one of the tools we use so that they can be empowered to understand and try to walk through a situation before they actually get into the heat of that angry moment. Because again, the thinking changes. So if you can think about it ahead of time and have some different patterns and strategies to think about when you get into the heat of the moment, that can be very effective. So yes, to really empower people with, again, going back to the healthy piece, because at that moment, with healthy anger with children, it can be a teachable moment, and
Right.
you can lessen the temper tantrums. There are certain ages and stages of development where children are, certainly toddlers have more temper tantrums. But if you're having, the child 6 or 8 years old and they're still having temper tantrums, there's going to be some other tools that maybe are needed. So just by being able to, and I deal with hundreds of parents have talked about this moment, rather than allowing that emotional moment to take the child and the parent to a place that makes them feel bad or guilty or disconnected with the child, it can actually be a teachable moment to build healthy relationships, safety, and a deeper sense of trust.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. Because it's so funny. I'm thinking about times where I don't have kids yet myself, but it's so interesting in those early ages and how important it is to be aware of the behavior. So, are you finding that it's like your goal? Because I heard you mention, like, the 6 and the 7-year-old. That's going to be a little tougher. So is it easier, say, to address the behavior, say, between the ages of 1 and 3? Because I know that 2-year-old time frame could be kind of challenging.
There are
So
critical
yeah,
development periods. Yeah,
yeah.
so you're really kind of focusing on some of those critical development periods. But I have to say, through ages and stages of development, kids will do emotional meltdowns. They look differently, and it's the brain developing. What's happening is that a child can't deal with. They have a lot of stuff going on, and the emotion becomes
Right.
so overwhelming that the part of the human brain as adults that calms the rest of the brain, the cortex, that actually regulates the rest of the brain, that's the last part to get wired. So an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old
Interesting.
doesn't have a fully wired brain. They don't even have the capacity necessarily to self-regulate. They need adults to help them co-regulate. Now, certainly as they grow older, we want to empower them with tools for self-regulation. I've actually helped preschoolers breathe. We've done breathing exercises. You can actually go on YouTube, and there's a lot of little kids helping each other co-regulate and breathe
So
together.
interesting.
And
That's
so
awesome.
there's ways of actually helping children throughout ages and stages, but that emotional dysregulation, and become teenagers, and then there's a whole nother brain explosion, and what to do with what does that
Yeah.
teenage emotional meltdown look like, and anger as a teenager. And so, yeah, as a parent, it's a long journey to figure out how to not have your buttons, to press your buttons and have children get under your skin. But the idea is that by empowering parents, a lot of times the anger reaction in those situations, any situations, is due to the fact that the individual doesn't have healthier ways to express. And I'll just kind of leave this principle with you, Stacey, is that anger is a choice. And so a lot of people think that they get angry because of the situation they're in. Every time I get into traffic, it makes me angry, or with the people that they're with. Whenever I go to this person or with it, she always makes me angry, or they always make, okay, they're doing things to emotionally activate an individual, but we all have the power to choose how we're going to express our anger. It's not about the
Mm,
situations or other people making us angry. It's about how we are reacting to those situations. And we can change thinking patterns and the perceptions of what's happening. We can offer more compassion, tolerance, grace. There's all sorts of ways, depending upon relationships, that can actually, again, reframe what's going on and have people take control of their own anger, as anger is a choice. And we all have the choice
mm.
as to how we can choose how we want to express our anger.
Oh man, absolutely. It's so interesting. I think, just like you said with awareness, if we take a few moments to really question what's going on, we realize that it's not personal. There's this amazing book, not sure if you've come across it. I forget the author. I think his name is Paolo, but The Four Agreements.
Yes.
Have you come across that? Yeah,
Yes.
that book is really insightful because it talks about anger and different situations that we may experience as people, but also even compliments, to not take it personally. And I think when we start to not take things personally, we can kind of because I think that when we do take it personally, whether it's somebody else's behavior or somebody got this promotion over me or whatever the case is, and we get frustrated, if we start to look in a space where it's like, oh, it's not personal, it takes a lot of the that tether to this fire away. It's like, oh, it goes out, but now we have room to question more, like, why did I feel that way? Why is it bothering me? And then we start to realize, and then it's so funny, Marty. I don't know if even you yourself or even people that you've worked with, they start to make the connection. You're like, oh my God, this happened when I was 3. And you're like 45. And you're like, how did this stay here?
And that's all that experience and emotion that lives in our brains and bodies. But yeah,
Right.
just realizing ways of self-awareness and being attuned to who we are and what we've been through and how that's impacted who we are, and all that comes into play. And again, in terms of changing anger and changing stress, it'll help us feel healthier. It'll help us.
Yeah.
Once I got past and understood this, Stacy, I was
Mm,
able to experience more happiness and joy. I was
yeah.
able to get into situations. You mentioned about not taking things personally. You get into more
Hmm.
critical thinking situations rather than being taken away and swept away by the emotion. You
Hmm.
can really start to grow and develop and heal in many situations. And a lot of people
Hmm.
get stuck in their anger. Their anger
Yes.
is a way they get stuck in their healing. Their anger gets them stuck in their healing process. And so just getting unstuck with that and the awareness of this is a larger intention to be able to help people heal from their emotional trauma, any type of chronic or
Mm,
toxic stress. But the idea is anger can kind of be a big boulder of that journey of healing, and to really help people deal with that and empower them with tools. The boulder may not get any smaller, but it's about getting up, over, or under that boulder. You got to get
yeah.
around, you got to get past it to be able to continue on the journey of emotional healing.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. Dealing with the anger is going to help us to uh, get to a simpler space in life. I think it would, say the person that gets annoyed in traffic. It's like, well, why are you annoyed? And when you start to realize, it's like, oh well, my time. Something with my time or something, whatever it is with them. It's like, okay, well, how can we better utilize our time? And I think there's such truth that can come out of that questioning space. It's so interesting. I think it's just so interesting because I just did another episode and I'm just like, it's the same concept with whether we're trying to do business in a way that serves the business and the consumer, or whether it's we want to get into a closer relationship with our kids or our family members or ourselves. It starts with that questioning, inner questioning, because even I'll say, as for me, a personal journey, I've realized my values and principles, but I had a history of silencing them because I didn't trust myself, you know? And what eventually happened is I would find myself in either situations or spaces where it went against my values. I knew it did, you know, because I kept on getting frustrated or angry, but I didn't question it. And then now going through it and reading, you know, I started reading books by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. And yeah, I just finished his book, A New Earth, and Power of Awareness by Neville. And it's like all of a sudden, it's like, you know, just like you said, the boulder was there, but it's like now it's like, oh, I could just kind of like, I have the power to kind of like move it in a sense. Like, I don't think it actually disappears per se. Like, it's always going to be there, but we have a different relationship with it. And then we can kind of be like, oh, here's the boulder again. Let me just put you over to the side real quick. You know what I mean? So it can absolutely lead to a different space of happiness and joy and grace. Like, it's out there, but I think sometimes dealing with anger is so challenging because it's like somebody just punch you in the face. Like, literally, sometimes it's somebody punching you in the face.
And the impact of that, whether it's any type of anger, can
Mm,
really weigh heavily on people. And really, as you suggest, is to find ways to not let that boulder define us, to be able to
mm,
find ways to get past it, to deal with it. And every individual is different. Again, sometimes the boulder's pretty big. Sometimes there's
yeah.
multiple boulders.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm certainly acknowledging that, but just realizing that we all can be empowered. And you bring up the Eckhart Tolle and The Power of Now, Stacy. So he talks in that book about the difference between pain and suffering, and a lot of
Hmm.
and the suffering piece is a lot of thinking patterns. And one of the undersides of us as human beings, and the great part, obviously, we have the thinking cortex, but the underside is we overthink things. And that's what
Yeah.
causes a lot of anxiety and depression and a lot of anger. And there's all sorts of intense emotions because of a lot of thinking. And it's all
Hmm.
about staying in that moment, really appreciating the individual's mind and body. It boils down to self-love and self-compassion and self-care and all of that, and who we are and our identity, and not allowing that boulder and not allowing what's going on externally to impact who we want to be internally. And so I
Heck
do
yeah.
appreciate trying to bring those connections in, because we have that. I suggest that book specifically in a lot of
Mm.
situations because of that difference between that pain and suffering. And he really talks about those thinking patterns. And we can really do some, a lot of times that negative thinking, that self-critical thinking can
Yep.
actually exacerbate the anger and exacerbate the stress. And so that's
Yep.
something that we really want to be kind to ourselves and show more self-love with that.
Oh, heck yeah, Marty. Like, that's the thing, you know, it's that self-realization that is your actual superpower, but it's okay that it takes time. I think that's what, you know, I'd like to get out to our listeners, you know, with your participation here, because you know we got to be kinder to ourselves and more patient with our growth, because I think sometimes we feel like we hit a ceiling, and the ceiling to me doesn't exist. I don't think there is an actual ceiling. I think we're infinite, and I think we can always grow, but I think it is the choice, the choice to grow, or the choice to end our suffering, or even to recognize that we are. Because some people actually don't know. They don't know. Like, I think in their, like, they feel it, but they feel like that's it, it is what it is. Like, it just is. So there's no questioning. There's no, because they've never, it's like going to somebody in the 1920s and showing them an iPhone. They're gonna be like, it's sorcery. Like, it's like, I'm gonna dunk you. Like, nobody's gonna believe that for me, no way. You know what I mean? Because it channels into that space of, like, you know, just like you were discussing before, you hinted on, like, shame and like that inner doubt. And you know, a lot of women too struggle with that ability, or not ability, it's I guess a hindrance of saying that they're not worthy. It comes down to that. That's a big one there. So what ends up happening is anger could be the outcome, or other emotions, because just like even myself, putting myself in spaces where I had no business being
Well, shame is actually a primary underlying emotion to anger. And so a lot of
Mm,
times, Stacy, and a lot of the people that I've helped, when we do unpeel the angry responses, we find a lot of shame messaging, self-shame
mm,
messaging. Then we go back into the history, perhaps, of that individual and find out there was a lot of shame messaging from primary caretakers or partners
mm,
or whatever it might be in that person's history. But once again, we deal and try to address the shame and try to change that messaging, then the anger changes as well. So we do get deep
mm,
like that in terms of trying to figure out, and going back to something else you said, that it's brave to do that, that people need to be
mm.
able to look within themselves, and not everyone is able to do that. And so again, that's the
Right.
safety. Some people want to do it very quickly. They're looking to change things. They want to,
Yeah.
as soon as we raise their self-awareness, they're really connected to it. Others, not so much. And we call it dosing. We have to really dose it out
Mm,
and make sure it's in safe doses that that person is able to accept what's happening. But also, to your point, we measure growth and healing in inches rather than miles. And so it's
nice.
all about really embracing that individual. And
Hmm.
if I can help someone to say and have them come back after a certain period of time and saying, you know what, I wasn't as angry with my sister on the phone yesterday. And
Mm,
after we talked about, and I realized what may be going on for her, and I realized that our patterns of, go through the different points of understanding of that relationship. If that person can just kind of change and just move the needle a little bit with that relationship, we look at that as healing and success, and really kind of moving down in terms of empowerment. And so a lot of times it starts out with those little wins and
yes.
those little successes, and then they start to build into bigger ones. Like, people become like, okay, I can do this with so and so. Now I'm going to go in and talk to my boss, and now I'm
Yeah.
going to go in so it's actually very inspiring to help
Yes.
people realize that their anger can be expressed in healthy ways.
Oh man, Marty, this has been like a phenomenal crash course in handling our anger and using this healthy anger toolbox. I love the name. It really shows that this is something that is here to serve us or to literally help us to understand who or why we are and to give us that peace to kind of understand why we are in that space of suffering. Now I'm going to use that word so that we can, free ourselves. Sometimes we don't even realize that we've put ourselves in a cage and we didn't even know. Like we literally didn't even know. I didn't know. I found out last year. I was like, oh snap. And the funny thing is with the cage, we don't realize that there's no lock on it. Like there's
Hmm.
literally no lock on it. The cage has been open this entire time, but it's up to us to have the wisdom and the gift of sight in that moment, which is awareness, to open the cage and to understand that we are deserving to live outside of that cage.
That's powerful. I like that image. I mean, that's just, and yeah, and really, we're deserving to live outside the cage. But for many people, they need to have tools to figure out how to get out of the cage, and
Yeah.
that's really the tool. The tools is how I connect, and that's why we're called the Healthy Anger Toolbox. Is
Right.
about, everybody's different. I mean, I have hundreds of tools, but for
Hmm.
each individual, it may be three or four of this or that. And it's all about trying to figure out for that person how to help them get out of that cage, and what can
Mm,
empower them, either the relationships that they have
mm,
immediate there in their lives they may or not be able to change, or it could be situations, it could be stress, it could be all sorts of things different for the individual, but to really find tools to be able to empower someone to change into healthy anger. And again, once that we start to make that change and people realize that that anger is their choice, and it's not about
mm.
the people that they're with, the situation, that they're empowered to think differently and react emotionally differently, it's amazing and very inspiring to see how people can make that change in very profound ways.
Oh heck yeah, Marty. Marty, where can we find you in the new I guess we're this portal of the internet, I'm gonna call it. Where can we find you to just in case we were like, you know what, Marty spoke to me today. Like I feel like I got some things I want to work on. Like How do we reach you?
Well, I'll give you a simple Web 2.0 way of doing it, healthyangeredtoolbox.com. So if you go to healthyangeredtoolbox.com, you can actually, I have a brand new app. You can get a personalized anger app that you can download for free. You join our Healthy Anger Toolbox and you download the app, and it has an anger log in there. We can actually log different points of an angry exchange, look back and reflect, and there's a lot of information on that. So I invite everybody to join us at the healthyangeredtoolbox.com and download your free app.
Oh man, Marty, this has been an amazing conversation. Like so many things now I'm thinking about, and just I guess for me, even it's being at peace with those moments. That's a constant practice for me. Like sometimes I'm like, again, are you kidding me? But I'm like, yes, of course, again. It's going to happen. It's that now you have the awareness to handle the situation. I think, you know, I think with how history has been going, there's always going to be moments of conflict or disagreements and things like that. And I think with using the healthy angry toolbox, we can learn how to show up for ourselves. I guess would be the best way to say it, to show up for ourselves so that we can realize like, okay, is this something that we're going to take part in now, or how are we going to deal with it? I think this is like the best time to speak to you. Your phone should be ringing off the hook right now.
There is a lot of stress and anger around, Stacey, that's for sure.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Let me drop the outro for us. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, so grateful, Stacey. Again, a courageous conversation. So inspired by you. Thank you again. So grateful.
Oh, thank you. Stay on. I'll talk to you for a few seconds. Oh man, and now I can't find my mouse. Oh, here it is. Here we go.